Good afternoon. It's 2 o'clock. We're going to begin the webinar on work zones, answering your questions. And we're very pleased to have with us today Ray Brushart, who is the safety circuit writer with the Ohio LTAP Center. I'm Victoria Beal, and I'll be moderating the webinar, but Ray is going to be your actual presenter. And I know that he's worked hard to pull this information together for you, so we're very pleased you were able to join us. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The presentation is intended to be interactive, and while we do have you muted on your phone line currently, we would encourage you to put questions into the chat pod on the screen while Ray is presenting. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll definitely open the phone line up for questions for everyone, but we want to try to minimize background noise while the webinar is being presented. So if you want to chat with us in the chat pod, if you don't see it on the bottom left-hand side of your screen, please look for a circle with a thought bubble in it and click on that, and it should then display the chat pod. It'll say conversation on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. You can put your information in there. So the other thing is that we are attempting to record the webinar. I don't know how successful we'll be with this. Sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't. But we're glad you're here in person to be able to participate in the webinar. And we would definitely encourage you to ask questions, because if you have a question, I would bet someone else on the webinar's got the same question. So put them in the chat pod or save them for when we open the phone line. Don't let the fact that we're recording it dampen any enthusiasm, because there's a chance the recording might not even work, and you definitely want to get your questions answered while you're on here. I believe that's all the housekeeping items I have. So Ray, are you ready to roll?
I believe I am, Victoria.
Thanks.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. As Victoria was saying, I'm Ray Brushart here with Ohio LTAP Center, and I'm the safety circuit writer, and I teach a couple versions of a work zone traffic control class, and so I'm going to pull from my vast knowledge of those two classes together, and hopefully answer some of your questions today. So first, I was going to go over some of the resources and reference manuals that we have here at ODOT to help me answer these questions you might have. So first, just a very general stuff about work zones. The purpose of work zones or temporary traffic control is to warn the motorists and pedestrians, or basically all road users, that we are out there working on the roadways, and we need to let them know that before they arrive at our work zone. So advanced warning is very important, and we need to advise them of the proper travel path around our work space, and make sure we use our temporary traffic control devices to delineate the areas for them not to use, and to separate their travel area from our work area. And we define our temporary traffic control in our work zones as a system to communicate with road users to safely guide them through a roadway affected by construction and reconstruction, maintenance activities, utility operations, disasters, special events, and incidents. So our main reference manual, of course, is our Ohio Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. It has 9 different parts that all deal with some sort of traffic control. We have a part for our permanent roadway signs. We have a part for our pavement markings, a part for traffic signals, other things too, like school zones and bicycle pathways. And of course, part 6 is what we're interested in today, and that is our temporary traffic control manual. And it's actually a state law that we abide by all 9 parts of this of the OMUTCD, and it says so right in the Ohio Revised Code, sections 4511.09, and it says that local authorities in their respective jurisdictions shall place and maintain traffic control devices in accordance with this manual and specifications for a uniform system of traffic control devices. So therein lies what ties us to using our manual. And so as we get familiar with the manual, you'll see it's loaded with different typical applications that show different scenarios for our work zones, whether we're flagging on a 2-lane road or maybe we're closing 2 lanes of a freeway or something, and anything and everything in between. But they start off by showing us the standards for each typical application, which is the bare minimum that we need as far as traffic control for that work zone. And then we use the guidance and options to help us enhance the safety over and above the standards. So in each typical application, you'll see the standards written in a large, bold text, and then the guidance is written the same size text, but not bold. It's usually italicized. And then we have our options that are shown in a smaller size text. So I like to refer to these these 3 different areas as safe, safer, and safest. And because the guidance is, if you utilize what's said in guidance, it's safer than just the standard. And then we have the options that help us make our work zones as safe as possible. So sorry, I'll keep clearing my throat. So, as we're setting up or designing our work zones, we want to keep this in mind that, as you're looking at each typical application, that you not only look at the picture in the typical application, but also read the page that goes along with it that contains the standards, guidance, and options. So, if you guys don't have copies of this temporary traffic control manual, the easiest way to get it is to call ODOT here and call our ODOT Office of Contracts at the phone number there, 1-800-459-3778. And you can get one for $12. And then another resource I'll be using today is actually derived from the temporary traffic control manual, but we call it our Work Zone Pocket Guide. It's also called the Guidelines for Traffic Control in Work Zones. And it's just a little booklet, so it doesn't have all the information, obviously, that's in the larger manual, but it has some very good information for roadway maintenance activities. Usually when I'm teaching my version of the work zone class, it revolves around maintenance operations for locals. And, of course, it's got several pages in here that are very helpful as far as specifications. There's pages for the specs for your different temporary traffic control devices, from your cones and drums and barricades and signs, arrow boards, barriers. And it's got these tables on page 17 that we're going to be getting familiar with today. And these tables help us to figure out the proper spacing of our signs and the spacing of the cones and how long of a cone taper we need and how long of a buffer space that we should use in our work zone for added protection. And it has some of the more common typical applications that are associated with roadway maintenance activities like flagging and mobile operations, also some intersection work, or even closing 1 lane or 2 lanes of a multi-lane roadway, and also like shoulder work as well. It has this work activity matrix in the back few pages that helps you select a typical application based upon the type of work you're conducting that day. So if you were, for example, patching potholes, you could, and you're on a 2-lane road, you could go across that line and you could select typical application number 10, which is flagging if you're on a busy 2-lane roadway. Or if you're on a low volume roadway, you could select typical application number 11. So there's a few different ways to get this pocket guide. One is to call that same 1-800 number there at the bottom of the screen. Or you can download it from our LTAP page, or you can use an app. We developed an app you can download to your smartphone, and it has everything in it that's in the in this booklet. Some other sources of maintenance of traffic information, or MOT. That's what the cool kids say when instead of saying work zones, they say MOT. And so means the same thing. But our ODOT Office of Roadway Engineering's webpage is loaded with work zone information. It's got some reference manuals, direct links to them, like the Traffic Engineering Manual or the ODOT, what we call the ODOT Spec book. It's also called ODOT Construction and Material Specifications. It has direct links to the OMUTCD and the Temporary Traffic Control Manual. It also has some really good examples of maintenance of traffic standard construction drawings and plan insert sheets. And so it's good that everybody knows about this particular web page on the ODOT website. Another source is right on the ODOT homepage. If you can just scroll down on the homepage until you see the sky blue colored icon. It says Design Reference Resource Center. You can click on that, and then you can just search for the reference manual that you're looking for there, and you'll find it. Okay, so our first question that we received, we were hoping to get questions beforehand, and this one was submitted, and this is exactly how the question was phrased. It says, regarding when to use barrels or portable concrete barrier when protecting a work site. And it says this is simple for drop-offs, but specifically we are looking at above ground protection for vehicles or stored materials, and are clear zone widths used to determine if barrels or PCB is used, such as if there was dumped gravel or a backhoe stored overnight behind the barrels, but within 4 feet of the traveled way is PCB required. So this might seem like a simple question, but it looks like it's got several parts to it. So what we did is we tried to pick it apart here, one question at a time within there. It says, are clear zone widths used to determine if barrels or PCB is used? Well, we did some research, and it seems like it says all factors impacting the activity area and work zone need to be taken into consideration, and engineering judgment utilized when determining the type of traffic barrier deflection to be installed. And then we found a pretty good answer to this question within the ODOT Construction and Materials Spec book, and there's a direct link to that spec book online. And again, you can also, there's also a direct link to it from the ODOT Office of Roadway Engineering. But then we found what we're searching for under item 614.035 in there, and it gives a list of situations of how to store your materials or equipment. And so after reading that, let's see, the question, the last part of his questions was such as if dumped gravel or a backhoe is stored overnight behind barrels, but within 4 feet of traveled way is PCB required. And after reading this, I guess the answer would be you should not install PCB for the sole purpose of protecting equipment or materials. And if you do have those materials, they have to be stored in an area that meets B or C below, because there was no existing barrier, just barrels. So B says not less than 30 feet from the nearest edge of the traveled way, so that has something to do with the clear zones. And in part C says at least 6 feet behind raised curbs. And so, the answer is you should not have been storing dumped gravel or a backhoe behind barrels within 4 feet of the traveled way. So that's not permitted. And then up here, I bolded this one. It says, unless otherwise permitted by the engineer, locate all equipment, vehicles, and materials stored or parked on highway rights-of-way to meet A, B, or C requirements there. And so if you're going to, the decision to install PCB should not be based on just storage of materials. Here's an example of PCB in a work zone. It's a closure of a right lane on a 4-lane divided roadway, and I just wanted to show what it looks like because I didn't want anybody to be confused about where to place the PCB. If you are using PCB, you still don't use it in the transition area or the buffer space of your work zone. So that is still barrels, as you can see as I'm outlining it there. And then when you do provide the PCB, you would install it as shown here, and then it has a protection here with a crash cushion at the end. So that's typical application number 34 in your temporary traffic control manual. And then he mentioned drop-offs on the first part of his questions, and that is referring to this table that we have. And you can find this also on the Office of Roadway Engineering's webpage at the link here at the bottom of the page. And it walks you through the process of trying to determine when PCB is required versus drum. So you've got, a distance here from the traveled way from less than 3 feet and greater than 3 or less than 5.
Or greater to 3 feet. Yeah. Sorry, Ray.
And then 3 to 5 feet, and 5 to 12, 12 to 24, and greater than 24. And then this table will walk you through when PCB is required. So that is a helpful tool there. That's what he was referring to as, I guess when he said that it was simple, as he said in the first part of his question, must have been referring to this. So I hope that answered his question. Question 2, we had a question I hear a lot in my class when we're setting up for some maintenance activities, and we're on a 4-lane roadway, undivided, and it's 35 miles per hour. How long of a taper do you need to close off that lane? So that's in the question referring to the transitional part of the work zone. And so we would be on a 4-lane roadway. We're going to use a taper called a merging taper. And then we can find the answer to this question by simply looking at these tables on page 17 of the work zone, what we call the work zone pocket guide. So here's but when we look at it, you'll see that the answer is 245 feet for a 12-foot lane. So here's the table that you would find at the bottom of page 17. And so you have, this is all about determining the length of tapers. And so you would, you pick your speed limit on the left side of the table, and then you go across to merging taper. And so there it is, 245 feet. Simple as that. So then question 3, how far apart are the cones in this same taper? So we actually have a table for that as well. And so we would check out, again, those tables on page 17. And there's 3 tables there. So we want to take a look at the middle table. And it's broken down. It's only got a couple different rows to it, 2-lane and multi-lane. So we want to look at multi-lane. And then we go over 1 column to the taper column. And then we look under there, and it says speed limit. So since the speed limit is 35, the maximum spacing of the cones there is 35 feet. So here's that table I was talking about. It says maximum spacing of channelizing devices in feet. Here's our multi-lane, what I'm circling here. And then we look under taper, and there's speed limit, so in feet. So that's 35 feet apart. Question 4, is there a way to figure out the minimum number of cones you must have for this same taper? So again, we're going to take a look at those tables. And it says, being that the length of the taper is 245 feet and the maximum spacing is 35 feet, we are going to divide 245 by 35, and then we add 1 to that because we're going to be placing the first cone at point 0 on the edge line of the roadway, the white edge line. So the answer would be 245 over 35 equals 7, and then we plus 1. So that would be 8 cones minimum for that taper. Again, that's minimum. You can put them side by side if you want, but 8 would be the minimum that you're required to have. Then we had a 5th question. It says, how long of a buffer space do you need for a flagging operation on a 55 mile per hour county road, which is a 2-lane road, 1 lane in each direction? So a buffer space is an option in this particular operation, and an option means if we use it, it helps make our work zone as safe as possible. So when you hear option involved with a work zone, it's not a situation where you think you can think, well, it's an option, therefore I'm not going to do it. It's optional, meaning if you utilize it, it's adding a lot of safety to your work zone. And so in this particular case, we're again going to be looking at those tables. We're going to look at the bottom table on page 17, and let's take a look at that. So here's that table. If you see over here at the far right column, it says flagger station / buffer. And so the question asks, how long of a buffer space do we need at 55 miles an hour? So we go over here to 55 miles an hour on the left and go straight across, and we'll see we need 495 feet for the buffer space. So that's also called the stopping sight distance for 55 miles per hour. And so basically what that is the distance it takes somebody to come to a stop after they've been completely surprised by a situation. So if you're thinking that that's a really long distance, it's because they're factoring in at least a complete second after they're completely surprised, and they actually haven't even hit the brakes yet, so they're still going 55 for that 1 second, and so before they even hit the brakes. And so that's why it's longer than you might think it is. So it's taking that into consideration, which adds another factor of safety to your work zone. Gives them enough distance to come to a stop before they run into anything or anybody. And so we definitely want you to use a buffer space in your flagging operation, especially at a high speed like 55 miles per hour. So here's question number 6. It says, how can you enhance the safety of your signing package for a flagging operation? So they're asking about the advanced warning area of your flagging operation. And so if we take a look at typical application number 10, either on page 26 of the Work Zone Pocket Guide or on page 746 of the Temporary Traffic Control Manual, those are 2 places that you can find typical application number 10. And so here's the picture of typical application number 10 that shows your flagging operation, and it shows the standard signing package. So you've got a road work ahead sign and a 1-lane road ahead sign, followed by the flagger symbol sign. So that's the standard, and so we want to enhance that. So if we take a look in the pocket guide, then we would see that it tells us some guidance and options about the signing, how to enhance it. So if you read it, it says that under options, it says, when used, the be prepared to stop sign should be located between the flagger sign and the 1-lane road sign. And under options, it says a be prepared to stop sign may be added to the sign series. So the addition of the be prepared to stop sign is add safety to your flagging operation. And when you use it, you would place it between the one-lane road ahead sign and a flagger symbol sign. So that adds an additional sign, but also adds, in this situation, an additional 500 feet, since your signs are 500 feet apart. So that gives you more storage as well. So not only providing more advanced warning, but also more storage space for your queue of traffic that would be stopped in your flagging operation. You know, as a flagger, you don't want to see your queue of traffic extend beyond your very first sign, because that would create a hazard. And so this gives you additional stacking space as well. So it's 2 levels of safety added there with that one sign. Here's question number 7. It says, for this same flagging operation, again, we're on a 2-lane rural road at 55 miles per hour, what is the proper spacing of our advanced warning signs? So again, there's a table on page 17. It's all about helping you to determine the spacing of your signs. So here's this table here. It says it's titled Recommended Advanced Warning Sign Minimum Spacing. So we look under road type, and we'll see we've got 4 choices to make. And in this particular case, we want to select rural. And so we come over here and see that our signs are 500 feet apart. A, B, and C are all equal to 500 feet. And so A, B, and C is shown in the picture in the typical application. We see A, B, and C over here, and that's the distance between each sign. So that's why it's calls out for A, B, and C in this table. Okay, here's another question we got. It says, what if we are on a 35 mile per hour multi-lane road and we need to close the right lane and the work zone is less than 500 feet from a big intersection, and we can't get typical application number 33 to fit because the distance required for the merging taper, buffer space, and advanced warning area requires about 800 feet for this typical application at 35 miles per hour. Is there another typical application which would be appropriate? And yes, this comes up quite often in cities and villages where you have closely spaced intersections and major driveways and things like that. So you would actually convert this, switch it from working on a section of roadway and switch it into an intersection type of job. And so all of the typical applications that are numbered from like 22 to 29 all deal with intersections. And so it just so happens that typical application number 22 would fit this scenario. It's a multi-lane road and the closure of a right lane on the far side of an intersection. Let's take a look at it. So here's TA22. You can see the workspace is here in the right lane on the far side of the intersection. And the benefit of this is that you're not required to have a long merging taper and a long buffer space and 300 feet added to that for your signing. So what you do is you're putting in a barricade here right at the intersection for the right lane and installing a flashing arrow board. And then your signing for that is down here. You actually going to use a regulatory sign mixed in with your warning signs. And the regulatory sign says right lane must turn right. And then you also have your orange diamond-shaped warning signs that say road work ahead and lane ends merge left. So these signs, in conjunction with your flashing arrow board, helps people to get over into this lane. And then you would extend this work area with your cones or drums. You would extend it up past your work site that is 500 feet past this intersection. And so when I was at the City of Columbus, we utilized this typical application quite often with the closure of right lanes. So, Victoria, do we have any other questions?
You know, Ray, I've encouraged people to put them in the chat pod on the bottom left-hand side of the screen, but I'm not seeing any.
Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and open the phone lines up. I'm unmuting everybody. You've been unmuted on our end, so if you'd like to unmute yourself, you're welcome to do that. You would just hover over the icon there by your name that has the speaker on it and right-click and then select unmute. Please feel free to ask whatever other questions you have. You know, this is all about being able to answer questions that you have regarding work zones, and your interactivity is definitely needed for us to be able to do that, or for Ray to be able to do it, I should say. So I thought you did a great job, Ray, explaining all the questions that you did receive.
Thank you.
So waiting here for a second, see if anybody's got questions in the chat
right.
pod. Looks like Amanda's typing something in, so we'll give her a second to do that. While she's doing that, I'll also remind folks that if you do want to have Ray come out and do work zone training for you, we have a short version of the class that he can custom tailor. You just need to have 15 people available minimum, and then that need the training in a room where he can teach the training in, and he's happy to schedule those one-on-one with any local public agency. So there we go. Brian says, Ray, I had question number 1. Thank you for the great answer.
Oh, you're welcome. I involved several people in answering that question.
Yeah. Brian, that's been a process over a few days. That was pretty complex. But Ray definitely did a good job on that one. And Amanda's still typing in. So, in an emergency repair situation, how long should traffic signs be up before starting work?
Well, as soon as they're in place, you can begin work.
But is there like a lead-up period where they need to be up before you actually start the work?
Well, no, like in a flagging operation, as soon as your signs are in place, and, the flaggers are ready to go, you can start. I mean, you might be thinking of something more complicated than that, like some major project. I know at ODOT we do a lot of public announcements and things as well. Maybe you can give me an example of what you're talking about. Maybe that help me better answer.
Amanda, we'd be happy to have you unmuted and be able to ask that question via audio if you want. I'll go ahead and just unmute your line. And if you've got a speaker there on your computer, it'll probably pick up your voice if you want to ask it. Oh, she's not following up right now,
Okay.
So that must have answered the question then. All right, are there any other questions from anyone who's on the line? Well, we've got Ray here. All right, going once, twice. If not, we'll also send out his contact information, and you can definitely contact him directly.
Yeah, you can call me directly or email, either one.
Thank you, everyone, for being on today's webinar. We appreciate it, and we look forward to hosting you on a future webinar. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.